This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. At least 32 people are killed as two trains collide in Egypt.
Our other headlines: China hits back and imposes sanctions against British organisations and individuals over what it calls our lies and disinformation about Xinjiang.
France warns the EU and the UK not to let a row over vaccine supplies descend into blackmail.
A victory for female supermarket workers in Britain in their legal fight for equal pay.
And could it be the last dance for Spain's famous Flamenco?
At least 32 people have been killed and more than 100 injured after two trains collided in Egypt. The accident happened in the province of Sohag and is the latest in a series of deadly train accidents that have blighted the country over the last 2 decades. Adel El-Mahrouki reports now from Cairo.
According to the Egyptian Transportation Ministry, what happened with the train crash is that an emergency brake from an economy-level train was pulled. The identity of whoever touched that emergency brake is still unknown. As the train came to a complete stop, another high-speed train coming from behind crashed into that train, causing the locomotive from the train coming from behind to derail 2 carts, and where most of the passengers, the injuries and the dead come from. After this announcement from the Transportation Ministry, the Egyptian Prosecutor General announced that he will be taking over the investigation. He has forbidden all government bodies from releasing any statements regarding of how the event unfolded. And now we're waiting for the official results of the investigation led by the Egyptian Prosecutor General. On the other hand, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has urged the Prime Ministry office and his cabinet to go to the crash site to look into the issue. The president vowed to push or to put anyone who is held accountable under harsh punishment. This is not the first time Egypt witnesses such a devastating train crash, and in the past years the country has been trying to upgrade its railroad management system, but it is a huge process and still far from being complete. The people, most of the passengers on the train and the dead and the injured, of course, they come from a very humble socio-economic background, and therefore any financial support from the state will be much needed. The governorship of Sohag is on highest medical alert. 4 hospitals have been designated to receive the injured and the bodies of those deceased. Further details about how the events unfolded will be announced soon as the Prosecutor General announces how the event took place. This is Adel El-Mahrouki from CGTN, Cairo.
China has imposed sanctions on 9 British citizens it accuses of spreading lies and disinformation. Beijing's move comes hot on the heels of similar measures by the UK. On Monday, Britain and the European Union imposed sanctions against Chinese officials over alleged human rights abuses in the autonomous Xinjiang region. Paul Barber reports.
Telling the real story of Xinjiang. That was how the Chinese embassy in the UK billed this online event amid an escalating diplomatic row between China and several Western countries over alleged human rights abuses in the autonomous region. On Friday, China sanctioned 9 British citizens, including 5 lawmakers, for spreading what it called lies and disinformation. It followed similar moves the UK had levied on Chinese officials in recent days.
If I could ask the Minister Chargé d'Affaires first to comment on Prime Minister Johnson's comments that he stands firmly by the British MPs and the other citizens who've been sanctioned by China.
So China is not the first to shoot. Neither will we be passive and submissive to threats from the outside. United Kingdom sanction on China is based on disinformation, misinformation, lies. So we strongly opposed to that kind of sanction. And we reserve our rights to respond to that. We have no intention to expand this kind of confrontation. But if others do, as I said, we'll keep them accompanied.
The British government said it stands in solidarity with those who'd been sanctioned, but also left the door open.
We continue to look for a positive engagement with China in the areas where that's possible, but we will never allow our values to be diluted. We will never look the other way when human rights abuses take place, whether it's in Xinjiang or Hong Kong.
Officials from Xinjiang also had the chance to directly address concerns, labelling accusations of forced labour, oppression of religious freedom and sterilisation of ethnic minorities as nonsense.
Xinjiang now is experiencing its most auspicious period of prosperity and development. Some Western politicians choose to believe the lies made up by a few instead of listening to the voice of 25 million Xinjiang people of all ethnic groups.
And some of those voices from Xinjiang also had their chance to be heard.
My son receives education in a boarding school. Some foreign people say that the government forced us, the ethnic minority, to send our kids to boarding schools and causing family separations. But such words are simply too ridiculous.
To senior workers when I didn't understand something, they were very helpful. Gradually, I mastered the professional knowledge on mushroom production, storage, transportation, and sale.
This event sought to paint a picture of what China calls a wonderful land, but it may take further dialogue before the diplomatic gap can be bridged. Paul Barber, CGTN, London.
Well, China's branch of the global trade body Better Cotton Initiative says it has not found signs of forced labour in Xinjiang. Burberry is the latest fashion retailer to face consumer backlash in China after it announced it would not source its cotton from the region due to human rights allegations. Many Chinese have called for boycotts of clothing brands like H&M and Nike after they expressed concern about forced labour in Xinjiang. Beijing has denied the accusations. Better Cotton Initiative's head office in Geneva told CGTN it's focusing its efforts on other Chinese provinces, but says it is engaged in constructive dialogue with Chinese authorities.
France's foreign minister says the EU must find an agreement with the UK over vaccine doses and avoid games of blackmail. It comes after EU leaders agreed to toughening export controls, but stopped short of a ban. The EU has experienced weeks of shortages and delays, especially related to pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca, which European leaders blame on a lack of deliveries from UK-based factories. Let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, who's in Brussels. Stuart, good to see you. So a sign then of further tension between the UK and the EU over vaccine exports. Do we know what kind of efforts are being made, if any, to ease this?
Well, right now, talks are going on between the UK and the EU with regard to how to solve this problem, but there is now another factor to take into consideration. The European Medicines Agency has approved 2 plants in the European Union, 2 vaccine manufacturing plants, one in Germany making the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, but another in the Netherlands, the Halix plant, which is making components for the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, that plant currently is dedicated to making components for the UK's order. The EU is going to see this plant as an opportunity for it to make up AstraZeneca shortfall with regard to the doses ordered into the European Union. So now there'll be a plant at the centre of this row about where vaccines should go based on where they're made. Should the EU force this plant, should the Netherlands force this plant to only give its components to European citizens, or should the doses go to the UK? The contracts are unclear and in some way contradictory. That was at the heart of discussions at the EU summit on Thursday, leaders trying to work out to what extent they should ban exports from the EU to other countries which have their own vaccine production facilities and immunisation programmes. What they didn't agree to do was to increase the rules, but France's Emmanuel Macron is certainly very keen that some form of export restrictions remain on the table.
Quand je lis la presse outre-Manche,
because when I read what the press on the other side of the channel writes, the European Union is being accused every day of being selfish. Wrong. We let our supply chains function as they were. That's very important. But we observed at the beginning of the year that the United States of America tended, within the framework of the system in place, to protect their own vaccine production, to prioritise the American market, that the United Kingdom did not export many doses, actually none. So we put in place an export control mechanism.
Stuart, what about distribution amongst European Union members? Are leaders any closer to resolving that dispute?
Well, one action that leaders took was to order an extra 10 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for distribution within Europe. Those 10 million doses, on the face of it, meant to be distributed to the states most in need throughout the European Union. However, at the summit, Austria decided to firmly try and put its citizens first, and that in turn seems to have jeopardised this plan, because it was joined by then 5 other member states who also said they wanted to receive the vaccine as a priority, despite Austria in particular not objectively needing as many, based on the criteria the EU Commission says, based on the criteria that they are doing relatively well with their immunisation programme. But Austria wouldn't budge, and that means that now these vaccine doses will either have to be distributed to other member states based on the size of member states' populations, or a new agreement will have to be worked out in time. But meanwhile, these million doses not being given to EU citizens.
Stuart Smith in Brussels, thank you.
Shop workers from the British supermarket Asda have won the latest stage of their long-running fight for equal pay. The UK's top court rules shop workers, who are mostly women, can compare their work to that carried out in distribution centres, which is mostly done by men. Our correspondent Nicole Johnston is outside an Asda in London.
The supermarket chain Asda has lost a long court battle in a case about equal pay. And it's likely it will impact workers in all major supermarkets. Basically, the Supreme Court has ruled the people who work inside the store, who are mainly women, can compare their work to those in the distribution centre, who are mainly men. 44,000 store workers say they should be paid the same amount as the men in the distribution centre. Asda argued you can't compare the jobs, but the Supreme Court didn't agree, and now the union representing workers could apply for compensation for over $680 million. It would be the largest equal pay claim in the private British sector. The case has been going on for almost 4 years, and it's not over yet. An employment tribunal will now have to decide if the jobs have equal value. Other major supermarket chains like Sainsbury's and Tesco's will be watching closely, because they have similar pay claims against them. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Well, Kieran Dorker is a lawyer from the company that represented the mostly female workers at Asda. I asked her how significant this latest ruling is.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on your show. I mean, it is a significant hurdle that we have crossed today. This particular part of the litigation allows the women now to compare themselves to men who work in distribution centres for a number of supermarkets across the country. This particular case was in relation to Asda, which was previously owned by Walmart, but the ruling now applies across the board to all supermarkets, and in fact probably broader than that, to all employers where they have a segregated workforce, where men and women work in separate places. There is now a chance to say that the women can compare themselves to the men, provided they are employed by the same people.
The judge stressed that this does not mean the claimants have won equal pay yet. So what is next for the Asda shop floor workers?
So when we bring an equal value claim, there are 3 parts to the litigation. The first is comparing, which we have now put to bed, and that is now sorted. The second is assessing the jobs. So we will ask the tribunal to look at the jobs of the women and compare them to the jobs of the men to see that they are, in fact, the same demands and they're just as demanding. And then finally, once we've succeeded on that, Asda and the supermarkets will have to argue that they can justify the pay difference. So there's still 2 more stages to go. However, we are already making significant progress on the second stage while we were waiting for the comparability arguments to be played out.
And what are the implications here for workers, perhaps in other supermarkets?
I mean, as I've said, this applies across the board. So all of the supermarkets will be looking at this decision very carefully. And what is lovely is that the Supreme Court has said, you know, these issues should really be resolved at a very early stage, and they've pleaded really for the other supermarkets not to appeal this point further because they feel that they have now clarified the issue that was in dispute.
Do you see this spilling out beyond the retail sector?
I mean, I think in any industry where there is a segregated workforce, where men work in one area and women work in another, historically there have been numerous types of areas such as cleaning, cooking, catering, clerical work. There is an issue around equal pay. So any employer that has a segregated workforce should be looking carefully to see why the pay is different between the 2 groups.
WeWork is set to go public through a merger with a so-called blank check company. The flexible office space company, which famously failed in its attempts to carry off an initial public listing 2 years ago, will join up with a special purpose acquisition company, a SPAC, called BowX Acquisition. And the deal values the company at around $9 billion.
The food delivery company Deliveroo has suffered a setback after 6 big UK investment firms said they will not buy shares over concerns about workers' rights. Deliveroo is hoping to raise $11 billion when it lists its shares in April. Delivery drivers are classed as self-employed, so do not qualify for minimum wage or other benefits.
Volkswagen's supervisory board has decided to try to claim for damages against its former chief executive officer, Martin Winterkorn, and former Audi CEO, Rupert Stadler. The move is part of its investigation into the diesel scandal. The German carmaker said the claims would be on account of breaches of the duty of care.
Ford is to end production of the Mondeo car at its plant in Valencia in Spain next year. The car has seen sales dwindle in recent years from a peak of 87,000 in the UK in 2001 to just over 2,000 last year. The model has been killed off by the rise in sports utility vehicles, as well as the industry moving to electric.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, travel between Germany and France just became a little bit tougher as Berlin tries to contain a 3rd wave of coronavirus.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube and Dailymotion and, of course, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. German officials are warning there could be 100,000 new cases of coronavirus a day unless the latest wave of the pandemic is brought under control. The country's Chancellor Angela Merkel is under pressure after reversing her decision to introduce a 5-day lockdown over Easter. Ryan Thompson's in Frankfurt for us. Ryan, that's a serious warning from health officials. Will Chancellor Merkel be forced to introduce more measures after all?
Hi there, Juliet. Well, it would seem like it, right? With more than 20,000 new cases reportedly continuously being reported each day, this idea that the pressure on hospitals could be quite serious by early April, and this threat from the RKI that there will be an exponential growth in cases, possibly over 100,000 per day in not so long. And yet we are seeing very little moves from Berlin to actually take action on this. Instead, we are seeing the power being passed to the states to make up their minds. And whether it's a combination of lockdown fatigue or no appetite for new measures, there's very little movement actually stepping forward towards new measures, despite the serious warning lights that are being flashed here.
But there have been some tightening of border restrictions between Germany and France. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so for many months now, the two European powerhouses have really tried to hold off on putting in any border restrictions between the two of them. We've seen some measures come into place little by little, first a quarantine, then a testing requirement. But both of them have really tried to keep the idea of Schengen borders open and keep the free movement at least going between the two countries. France has now been classified what's considered the highest risk by Germany's Robert Koch Institute, which means that, well, quarantine is required on arrival, testing is required, but it actually doesn't really change much because a lot of these rules were already in place, especially in the case of the Moselle region, that's considered a high variant area. We were listening to Angela Merkel last night, and she sort of spoke about regretting this decision, but saying it is required, it is what the science suggests with such high case numbers in France. But she said that there was an appetite to at least give a little bit of leeway in the case of France, to keep public transportation that crosses the border going, to keep cross-border commuters allowed to keep functioning in their essential jobs going. France has sort of regrettably taken this move quite hard over the past few months. They've pushed back, saying they had a firm desire compared to Germany, which was more eager to put the restrictions in place. But finally, listening to the French foreign minister this morning on French radio, he said that this move is understandable and the time was right given the situation in France right now.
Ryan Thompson, thanks very much.
Well, as Ryan was explaining, the situation is just as serious in France as Germany. France will start enforcing a stricter partial lockdown in 3 new regions in the coming hours as authorities try to control a third wave of coronavirus. It comes as doctors warn that hospitals in Paris are under severe strain. Ross Cullen reports.
France is firmly in the grip of a third wave of COVID-19 infections, with surging case numbers and increasing pressures on hospitals. There are more than 4,700 people in intensive care with COVID-19, the highest number this year, and approaching what France saw in the second wave last November.
It's going to be very complicated because whatever we do, those who are infected today will need to go to hospital or intensive care 10 days from now, and those in intensive care will stay for 2 to 3 weeks. So this coming month will be hell.
De toute façon, le prochain mois va être infernal.
France is hoping its so-called deceleration measures will be enough to slow the spread of the virus. Emmanuel Macron says France can avoid a third national lockdown, but he recognises more may now need to be done.
No doubt, in the coming days and weeks, we will have to take new measures. We will take them all together in light of the facts, in a transparent way and in real time.
The UK and Germany both stuck with winter lockdowns, but the French government was determined to use a national curfew instead of a nationwide confinement, a decision the president defended.
I can tell you this time I have no mea culpa to make, nor any remorse or admission of failure. We were right to do it.
But alongside the deteriorating health situation is the improving picture regarding vaccinations.
Pharmacists are already able to carry out COVID-19 tests and jabs, and soon more qualified people like dentists and vets will be able to carry out coronavirus vaccinations as well.
The government has a goal of getting 10 million people vaccinated by mid-April. At the current rate, that's an ambition it's likely to meet ahead of time. And starting from this weekend, those over 70 in good health can now get the shot. After a slow start, France is enjoying a more positive outlook on vaccinations, but clouds are gathering over the exploding infection rate, with the possibility of further restrictions to come. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
And in Central Europe, the health systems in Hungary and Poland are also under severe pressure from a third wave of coronavirus. The highly contagious COVID variant, first identified in Britain, has been blamed for the rapid rise in cases. Penelope Lish reports from Budapest.
275 people have died in the last 24 hours, the highest number of daily COVID deaths in a week full of grim new records for Hungary, including overtaking the Czech Republic to claim the world's highest daily deaths per capita. It was thought the nation was nearing the peak of the third wave. Now, with almost 12,000 patients in hospital, it appears the wave is building much higher than expected.
The restrictions are strict, but I think it is needed to fight the COVID.
The numbers are not decreasing at all. I don't think the restrictions were enough, and probably they should have announced them a lot earlier.
In Poland, the situation is just as stark. On Friday, a record number of new cases were reported, 35,000. The leaders of both nations have admitted this is the most difficult moment since the pandemic began.
We are getting close to the limits after which the health service may not be functional. We are a step away from the point where health services will be unable to treat patients properly, treat our citizens, and we have to do all we can to avoid this scenario.
From Saturday, Poland will shut kindergartens and hair salons and limit people attending church services. The Hungarian response seems to fall the other way. The overnight curfew will be shortened and shops will close later. The number of shoppers allowed inside will be dictated by the size of the store.
I think that this amount of restrictions will do. It's exhausting after all this, but you definitely need it. The fact that schools and restaurants are now closed, it is for the best. They should not be opened anytime soon.
Here in Hungary, the Prime Minister is still insisting there will be a free summer, but there's a long way to go. Already, the date for schools reopening has been pushed back to the 19th of April, with the government changing their stance to prioritise vaccinating teachers. Vaccination is still the government's great hope. More than 1.8 million people have now had at least one dose of a vaccine. But reports from the health system are that it's struggling under the weight of COVID. How long it will take for restrictions and vaccines to outswim the third wave remains to be seen. Penelope Lish, CGTN, Budapest.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how $200 million of trade has been disrupted since our programme started at the top of the hour.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. China hits back and imposes sanctions against British organisations and individuals over what it calls lies and disinformation about Xinjiang. At least 32 people are killed as two trains collide in Egypt. And France warns the EU and the UK not to let a row over vaccine supplies descend into blackmail.
China's defense minister has arrived in Belgrade for talks with the Serbian president. General Wei Fenghe is touring Central and Eastern European countries to boost bilateral military cooperation. Let's talk to our correspondent, Alyosha Milenkovic. Alyosha, Serbia is not part of NATO. How is this strengthening of ties likely to be viewed by the West?
Well, Jamie, it's definitely going to raise some eyebrows in the West, particularly because Serbia is not a NATO member and it's not going to be a NATO member as according to official policies here. And let's not forget also that the Chinese defense minister is visiting 4 countries in this tour, and before he visited Serbia, he was in Hungary. After Serbia, he's going to Greece, and then he'll visit North Macedonia. Out of 4 countries he's going to visit, only Serbia is not a NATO member. So the analysts explain that as an attempt by both Beijing and those 3 or 4 countries, in this case in Serbia as well, to increase and improve bilateral ties in the military area. So it is not seen as, for instance, some would like to show it as a way of Beijing poking in the eye of NATO, but this is seen more like bilateral increasing of ties, particularly when we know what is happening here since the COVID pandemic started. It was China that is seen as a good guy here. China was sent a lot of medical help to both Serbia and many other countries in this region, and of course Serbia has really good economic ties with China, some would say even crucial economic ties with China. So expansion in the military area is not something new for Serbia, and maybe it's not something new for the entire region as well. Serbia and China have long-lasting military relations, maybe from early 1990s, and of course China had supported Serbian military in many ways and many aspects. Even joint military exercises on a small scale, though, were happening. And even today, Chinese Defense Minister Wei Fenghe invited Serbian military and Serbian special forces to come to China and to jointly train with their Chinese counterpart. So this visit is seen here in Serbia as further improvement of already really good economic healthcare ties into, of course, military area and military sphere. But let's not forget, after visiting Serbia, Chinese defense minister is heading towards Greece, where he will attend 200th anniversary of the Greece liberation from the Ottoman Empire.
Alyosha Milenkovic, thank you very much.
One of the biggest shipping vessels in the world remains stuck in one of the world's busiest trading routes, creating the biggest traffic jam in the world. The container ship, called the Ever Given, has been stuck sideways in Egypt's Suez Canal since Tuesday after running aground in high winds and a sandstorm. Experts say it could take days or even weeks to dislodge it. Well, Guy Platten is Secretary-General of the International Chamber of Shipping, and he joins us now. Thanks ever so much. Well, look, the backlog is growing. Some ships are stuck, some are completely rerouting. This is getting expensive.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. There's well over 200 ships now stacked up waiting to go into the Suez Canal. It seems no sign of getting the ship refloated at the moment. I know huge efforts are going on to try and get her off, but nonetheless, the backlog continues. It's becoming very expensive. We know every day about $8–9 billion worth of trade flows through the canal. So 3 days later, that's $27–30 billion. So it's a huge sum of money. And we're also hearing reports that shipping companies are now diverting their ships the long way round. In other words, going via the Cape of Good Hope and the tip of South Africa, which adds another 3,500 miles to the journey, which will no doubt increase delays further.
And time, as we know, it is money. Look, the world was already in a bit of a cargo conundrum, though, wasn't it? With so many ships in the wrong places, all because of supply chains being thrown out of kilter because of the pandemic. This couldn't have come at a worse time, could it?
I think what it does highlight is the strategic nature of the Suez Canal, and I think it also shows how vulnerable supply chains are. I mean, shipping has done an incredible job over the last year, keeping the world supplied throughout this pandemic. It's resilient, it alters supply chains, to actually suit the circumstances, and it's done an incredible job. But the Suez Canal is a strategic waterway, and it really, really is. Just shows you it's the shortest route between Asia and Europe in terms of the trade, and when that gets blocked, it has severe consequences for world trade.
I think I heard the ship's cat there in the background.
Yes.
Look,
so I've got a young puppy here, and it's causing havoc next door, so sorry.
Not to worry, but I'm glad we've identified the mysterious noise. In terms of this calamity getting worse, I mean, what do you think the impact could be on insurance premiums, on the cost of oil, on the cost of stuff, iPhones, ordinary goods that are transported that way?
Well, I think it depends on how quickly they can remove the blockage, and let's hope it's done quickly. We're not going to see those things for some time. What we are going to see is delays and disruption to goods getting to the market. There's no doubt about that, and that can have knock-on impacts on prices. In terms of claims, I mean, this is going to be a lawyer's dream now, because you've got not only the ship with the 20,000 containers and all the interest combined with that, you've got the salvage, you've got the refloating, you've got all those ships have been delayed. So there's a lot of claims and a lot of counterclaims to come over the next few weeks and months as this gets sorted out. So I think they're going to be the only winners out of this, I feel.
How dangerous is it for these cargo ships to be static? Security experts have raised concerns about piracy. I mean, should we be worried?
I think where they are at the moment, that's relatively okay. I mean, we're always concerned about security on board ships. That goes without saying, and the welfare and health of our workforce. I think in some ways, the ships having to divert round Africa could cause its own problems through the Gulf of Aden and then to the Gulf of Guinea, where we know there's active piracy in the Gulf of Guinea in particular now. So that's a concern if the diversion takes place. But in terms of that, let's hope this gets resolved very quickly and things can get back to normal as soon as possible.
Guy Platten, thanks very much. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ethiopia's Prime Minister says Eritrea will withdraw troops from the shared border 5 months after a conflict started in the Tigray region. The soldiers are there to support Ethiopia's government forces as it fought a group that challenged the central government's rule. Thousands of people have died in the conflict, according to human rights groups. Eritrea has not confirmed the troop withdrawal.
In Myanmar, at least 3 protesters have been killed by security forces during demonstrations. Around 320 people have now been killed since the military takeover in February. It comes as the United States imposes fresh sanctions on conglomerates controlled by the army, and the World Bank warns the country's economy is likely to slump 10% this year as a result of the unrest.
In Tanzania, the coffin of the late President John Magufuli has arrived at his ancestral home ahead of his funeral. President Magufuli died last week from heart disease. His coffin has been travelling around the country. According to local TV, 5 people have died in a stampede at a stadium where hundreds of people had gathered to pay their last respects.
Hundreds of demonstrators in Bangladesh have clashed with police during a protest against the visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Tear gas, rubber bullets and water cannon were used to try and disperse crowds in the capital, Dhaka. Modi is on a 2-day trip to take part in the country's Golden Jubilee independence celebrations.
At least 5 people have been killed after tornadoes ripped through the U.S. state of Alabama. The fatalities happened in the town of Ohatchi after the twister destroyed homes and downed trees and power lines. Rescue crews say they're searching for survivors.
Joe Biden has held his first White House press conference 64 days into his presidency. He began with a pledge to double his coronavirus vaccine goal to 200 million shots administered by his 100th day in office. The president took questions from journalists on the US-Mexico border, relations with China, and his intention to run in 2024. Let's talk to our correspondent, Jim Spellman. What would you say the main takeaways were from the Biden press conference, Jim?
Well, I think there was somewhat of a detachment, honestly, between the White House press corps and what is on the minds of average Americans. I mean, you mentioned this, pretty major shift in vaccine goals for COVID-19. Not a single question during this press conference on COVID-19, while the president had to face questions on things like, will he run in 4 years, and will Kamala Harris be his vice presidential nominee in 4 years? A bit ridiculous. He did, though, face difficult questions about the border, and I think that will be a lingering issue for this administration. We heard him talk about guns, but he said that that is a priority that will follow his next big push, which will be an infrastructure spending bill. On foreign policy, he mentioned the DPRK, he mentioned China, he mentioned Afghanistan, and in all these cases saying the basic layout will be here for the U.S. to build alliances with other countries around the world and then move forward on those issues in lockstep with those other countries. On China specifically, he said that China will present a major area of competition for the U.S. for years to come. Listen.
I see stiff competition with China. China has an overall goal, and I don't criticize them for the goal, but they have an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world. That's not going to happen on my watch, because the United States is going to continue to grow and expand.
Now, China has repeatedly pushed for more cooperation in this relationship and less conflict, and China has also pointed out that the United States should save its criticism for its own internal problems that we have here in the U.S., things like racism and gun violence. But Biden has said repeatedly that he will continue to call out China on issues Beijing considers to be sensitive issues, things, of course, like Xinjiang and Hong Kong. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also repeatedly pointing out that the U.S. does not make the global rules. That comes from the UN, and it's often the United States that is acting out of lockstep with UN rules and not China. Back to you.
Well, Jill, we know the president's in the United States, but this is the power of technology means he can be in many places at once, and rarely he was a guest of honour at a gathering of EU leaders.
Yeah, and this is the first time that this has happened since 2009 when Barack Obama did it, and before that, 2001, George W. Bush making an appearance. So this is a rare opportunity, really, for a U.S. president, and I suspect many of those European leaders were glad to have Joe Biden looking back at them through their computer screens versus his predecessor, Donald Trump. The goal here for Biden is to rebuild these relationships that have been frayed under Donald Trump. And as I mentioned before, it's a big part of Joe Biden's foreign policy view to work on these alliances around the world and then move forward on challenging issues like China with those countries. The White House, though, does acknowledge that many of these countries, European countries, Germany, for example, will have a different approach to dealing with Germany, but still the White House feels that if they can rebuild these alliances, they can move forward from a stronger position. We saw this play out with Joe Biden's meeting with the so-called Quad before the meeting with Chinese diplomats in Anchorage, and now we're seeing it in Europe. Juliet?
Thanks. Jim Spellman in D.C. Thank you.
There are growing concerns about the health of the jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The 44-year-old's lawyers were finally allowed to visit him in prison and afterwards said that Mr. Navalny has been unwell for 4 weeks and pleas for medication have been ignored by the authorities. He's reportedly woken every hour during the night as authorities classify him as a flight risk.
Former Scottish National Party leader Alex Salmond, who has been embroiled in a political scandal over the handling of sexual harassment claims against him, has announced he's launching a new pro-independence party. In a move which could split the vote and harm Scottish Minister Nicola Sturgeon, he said the Alba Party will field candidates in forthcoming elections in May.
Lockdown restrictions in Wales are to ease, with the stay local message to be dropped. Phased reopening of the tourism sector begins next week. Self-contained tourism accommodation, including many hotels and cottages, will also reopen. But non-essential travel to and from other UK nations will remain banned for at least 2 weeks. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, working from home is stressing us out. We'll be finding out why.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Farm workers in America say they should be a priority in receiving a coronavirus vaccine in order to keep the country's food supply up and running. Mark New reports from California.
Farm workers are the backbone of America's food supply, yet for months they fought to get prioritized for COVID-19 vaccinations. In California's Salinas Valley, the go-ahead for farm workers of all ages only happened 3 weeks ago. That's why each weekend events like these are filled with thousands eager to get their shot. A United Foundation farm workers survey of more than 10,000 U.S. farmers found that 73% said they would get the vaccine as soon as possible. Just 5% said they would not. Have you seen a lot of your friends or other workers get COVID?
Yeah, some friends in this company, before have COVID. Different, some people little bit sick, other people more sick. The first thing is important for my family, protect my family and myself first.
A University of California, Berkeley study found that 13% of the Salinas Valley farm workers studied tested positive for COVID, compared to 5% of the general population. 20% tested positive for antibodies, indicating prior infection.
They have to go out to work. They're an essential workforce that can't work from home. They need to be out working with other groups of people, and their work causes them to be in close proximity to one another. it's not unusual to have as many as 3 to 6 families living in a single house. And so that close proximity makes it extremely dangerous that if somebody gets infected.
Instead of navigating individually through confusing websites at pharmacies or health providers, these farm workers have come in groups organized by their companies.
Some of them, may offer incentives. Some of them have them working on company time while they're coming here to get the vaccine. And so we leave that side to the employer to kind of incentivize, identify. In some cases, there's no incentive needed because we've waited for so long, particularly here in Monterey County, for farm workers to be eligible to get the vaccine.
For salad packer Pedro Perez from Mexico, the process couldn't have been simpler.
My company made an appointment for me here today. I was a little nervous, but I was very happy to get the vaccine.
Grower shipper President Valadez says an influx of new workers will soon be arriving to help out with the spring production season. So as the ag industry continues to play catch-up, he hopes governments and the public will come to realize farm workers worked straight through the pandemic, so it's only natural they should be prioritized, just like the nation's food supply they protect. Mark News, CGTN, Salinas, California.
Allow workers back into the office or they'll quit, the UK Chancellor's stark warning for British bosses. Speaking to the UK's Daily Telegraph newspaper, Rishi Sunak trumpeted the benefits of the office amid a slew of closures. Lockdown has shut all kinds of business spaces and forced a change in working habits, which might stick. The Building Society nationwide recently announced 13,000 staff would be allowed to work anywhere. Well, Rishi Sunak certainly isn't alone in supporting a return to the office. While home working remains a welcome change for many, for some it's caused burnout. Workers at Goldman Sachs have complained about 95-hour working weeks, while Citigroup has enforced Zoom-free Fridays. There is an appetite for a return to normal. 61% of CEOs intend to go back to office-based work. That's according to KPMG. Well, Nanufa Ahmed is from the University of Bristol. I asked her why working from home appears to be causing so much burnout.
There are no boundaries anymore between work and home, and it is a bit of a chore to get up early and do that commute and get into work. But at least you've got a break when you leave work. You can leave your work behind and you can come home and relax. Many of us working from home just have our work stuff spread around our tables and our homes, and we start at the same time because we're expected to be at our desks at a certain time. But we don't end at the same time because we think, well, I don't have to do that commute. So you know what, I'll just carry on a bit more than after 5 p.m. and then that becomes 6 and 7 p.m. And even when we shut our computers down, we end up looking at our phones for emails, and our work is just there. It's in the peripheral part of our vision.
It's interesting, isn't it? We've had decades of legislation about looking after people in the workplace, but perhaps people working at home don't have the same level of protection. I wonder, given this is probably here to stay in some form, working from home, how do you sort this problem? How do you fix it? How do we look after people better?
Having a range of really strong ethical procedures in place, asking people not to look at their emails after a certain time or not to respond to them. And many workplaces encourage you not to do that, but maybe making that a little bit firmer so that everyone feels that they are abiding by the same rules. Because as much as I'm told I don't have to answer emails after 5 p.m, if I'm seeing my colleagues are doing that, then I might feel that extra bit of pressure to do so. Encouraging people to have breaks in their daytimes, maybe having emails only answered at a certain time or an email break during the day as well.
Many company bosses are reported as planning to bring their staff back into the workplace in different ways, different times, and even different locations. What are your thoughts on the return to work post-pandemic?
I think that staggering these different ways of coming into work is a really good idea, because as much as we took some time to adjust to working from home and being in lockdown, it's not going to be the same. We are going to enter into a very different world than the one we left behind. Things have changed around us already so much. And so having this range of work options will be great for the team. We'll see a huge difference across the work team. We'll probably have people that are able to have a greater balance in their work life. a more democratic work structure for people. So you can come in a bit later if you've got family duties, if you're caring for people, if you've got kids to look after, or if actually you just are not a morning person and you want to start a bit later and work a bit later. But I think we'll see a much happier workforce if we are able to stick to some of the changes we've seen.
Flamenco dance has been one of Spain's most iconic cultural treasures for hundreds of years. But this most Spanish of art forms is at risk of dying out. The pandemic has forced venues to close and is pushing artists to the brink. The industry's asked for government help, but as Rahul Pathak reports, time may be running out.
For many, Spain and flamenco go hand in hand. With its dramatic movements, its passion, its colour, it is the quintessential Spanish art form. But flamenco is now in serious danger of dying out thanks to the pandemic.
I can't remember living through a situation like this before, either in flamenco or culturally, in this country or anywhere in the world.
Antonio is the chief choreographer at El Corral de la Moreria, Madrid's most famous flamenco venue, or tablao. For 65 years, all the greatest names in flamenco performed here. However, the last year's lockdown meant their main customer base, overseas tourists, stayed away, resulting in the collapse of their business.
I feel devastated. This place is the epicenter of the flamenco world. It used to be full of people who used to enjoy flamenco up close and personal, live it the way it should be lived.
Now, over the past year, nearly a third of all flamenco establishments have had to permanently close, so the situation is pretty dire. The industry is asking the government for urgent and forceful action if places like this are to survive. Earlier this month, industry leaders met with government officials. Spain's Ministry of Culture say they will study the issue, but so far there has been no financial help.
Después de 12 meses con los tablaos flamencos cerrados en España.
For the last 12 months, flamenco venues have been shut, with all the costs that come with that and no income. So we have asked for support, some form of protection, so that our cultural heritage, called tablao flamenco, doesn't disappear.
Que son los tablaos flamencos.
According to Juanma, approximately 95% of flamenco artists get their work from venues like the El Corral. So with tablaos now closing all over Spain, there's genuine fear the lights could go out on flamenco permanently. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Pictures capturing polarised light swirling around a massive black hole have been caught on camera by stargazers for the first time. The pictures from the worldwide Event Horizon Telescope collaboration show the rings around the star, which is 55 million light-years from Earth. To see more, europe.cgtn.com.
And staying in the heavens, China's space agency has released 2 striking images of Mars taken by the country's Tianwen-1 probe. The photos were taken from 11,000 kilometers away and show a crescent-shaped planet. Tianwen-1 has been in Mars orbit for around a month and will attempt a landing in May or June. It's been a busy old year for the red planet, with 3 missions reaching the planet's orbit.
Reminder of our top stories. China has imposed sanctions against British organisations and individuals over what it calls lies and disinformation about Xinjiang. In the past few minutes, we learned China's charge d'affaires was summoned to the Foreign Office to be told these actions are unwarranted and unacceptable and would not prevent the UK shining a light on human rights violations.
At least 32 people have been killed as 2 trains collided in Egypt.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.